Hi, it's Chris Grimm, and this is Deep Work Fast, where every week, 20 minutes or less, I bring you concepts, ideas, uh, tools that I know work, but I've been coaching people for 28 years. So I've got a pretty good collection of things that I know work for men and women at home or at work with whole teams, etc. So that's why it's Deep Work Fast, and I hope you want to do it. So here we go. This week, I want to talk about the concept of vulnerability. I want to get into it in a way that you might not hear all the time. What I hear in coaching is that people want relationships, and I'm sure you do, that are reliable. People use words like more connected. I want to be able to influence people more. I want to know I can trust people faster and maybe more. I want them to be ironclad. Somebody said that to me the other day. Anyway, if you want all those things, most likely you've thought about trust and you've heard concepts like vulnerability before. But today I want to talk about the relationship between those two things, give you some resources. And of course, we have a blog too that the link will be in the chat, and it's a quick read. And some of what I'm going to say will be in there, but I'm going to do a lot more. So, first of all, most of us think about trust, whether you know it or not. So really maybe take some notes and think about how you think about trust. And maybe you know the two things I'm going to say. Most likely you may have heard them, but you might not be using them. So most people think about trust, and what they're really talking about is their ability to predict, right? This is called predictive trust, what the other people are going to do, right? So in most of our relationships with the people we work with and live with, we get used to their behavior, right? We start to be able to predict what people will do, even if we don't like it, right? So even if we don't like what people do, we know, right? You know people's personal brand. You can usually predict what they're going to say and what they're going to do. So through many, many surveys for many, many years by lots of companies, we start to realize that people say they trust people when they can predict what they're going to do, even if what the person's going to do is bad, and even if the person is highly inconsistent or chaotic. When we know that's how they operate, we can at some level trust them, right? So that is called predictive trust. I want to talk to you today about a different kind of trust. And if you've read any of Pat Lencioni's books, you probably have heard the concept called vulnerability-based trust. Now, vulnerability-based trust is actually, I believe, through all these years of coaching, the better source of trust for you to want, for you to work on, first with yourself, and then, of course, with your family and your team. Bring these concepts in there. And the difference between the two is that, like I said, predictability-based trust or predictive trust means we're just watching behavior patterns, and oftentimes we're just getting used to them. So whether we like it or not, we just learn to trust kind of their defaults. In vulnerability-based trust, because we're humans and because emotion actually is something that emotion and intimacy between each other and in our relationships actually creates stickiness. So you can actually get deeper trust, more reliable trust, and trust that tends to, like I said, it's sticky. It becomes a glue between you and the other person. And so instead of you having to watch them behave and try and predict what they're going to do, vulnerability-based trust tends to lock us together with people so that we have a deeper knowing that we can rely on those people. Trust that what they're saying to us, no matter whether we want to hear it or not, is for our own good, right? We can also then trust their critique. And this is important at work, right? Because on teams, it is critical that a work team, so at the executive level, all the way down through the organization, if you work, you know, people have to have some trust of each other, because most likely there's going to be problems. There are going to be times where two people might have two different opinions or different information about the same topic. And to make a decision, that team or that group are going to have to come to some level of consensus, or at least vote on it. And even if you don't want consensus in your organization, and you still need people to get along, collaborate, and move forward together with one solution, not, a whole bunch of people sitting around having a hard time agreeing on the way forward. You want them to be able to agree. So when we can trust people, not just predicting their behavior, but trust them as a human, trust their character, trust their competence, trust their critique, which is their opinion about the topic that might be high stakes. Maybe it's about you. Maybe it's about your team. Maybe it's about a topic no one's telling the truth about because the boss is going to get mad, whatever. We want that level of critique. We want people to be able to have the open, uncomfortable, crucial conversations as quickly as possible without damage. If you don't have vulnerability-based trust, it's very, very difficult. So how do we do that? Vulnerability-based trust means people need the safety, and I'm sure you've heard it. It's a very trendy thing right now, and it has been for the last few years to talk about psychological safety. And that's a fancy way of saying we need a space and safety to be able to be completely emotionally naked. Yes, I mean that. I didn't mean physically naked. I mean emotionally naked, totally authentic, completely transparent, open with each other, right? So if you have a team or a family where the people are safe enough with each other, then you will hear things like, I'm sorry, I don't know, I screwed up, I made a mistake, I'm afraid of this because I think XYZ is going to happen. This scares the shit out of me. Whatever. When people can be authentic without worrying that that person's going to stab them in the back or they're going to lose their job for being completely honest. When you have emotional nakedness, which is also vulnerability, right? Because vulnerability, let's just talk about what that means for a second. Vulnerability is the willingness for you or any human to be completely open and honest about however you're feeling, whatever you've done, without feeling like you're going to be either judged, rejected, hurt, left behind, kicked off the island, lose your job, lose your marriage, whatever. When we're not safe, so let's put those things together. So psychological safety means I feel safe enough to tell you the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to put myself in a place where I'm going to trust that you're not going to reject me for saying this, or you're not going to respect me anymore. So I'm doing this deep work fast because what I know from coaching executives is many people who are in a managerial role tend to believe that they can't tell the whole truth about how they're feeling about things, specifically when the team is being asked to do something really challenging. What team doesn't get new goals every year? And hopefully those goals are stretch in some way. Like, why would we want to just do the same thing we did before? No, let's go big, right? Let's do something exciting. Let's do something new. Well, what comes along with bold and exciting and challenging and sometimes highly unrealistic goals in business are people who are afraid. Now, our whole society, if you haven't noticed, usually wants us to pretend like we got this. Have you been on Instagram? Everyone has all of these things. And by the way, I love positivity and optimism. What I don't like is when people are faking it all the time and believe that they have to present to everyone this, I always am right, I always know the answers, I can handle anything, I'm invincible, all of that stuff. And I see it in leaders and organizations all the time. They feel like they have to say yes to whatever the CEO or the boss pushes down through the organization. And while I am for alignment and saying yes to what the leaders want, I want that to be strategic, but I also want the team to be accepting those challenges with realism. I want the group to have planned well together, and I want every team in your organization, and frankly, your family, if you're planning something big like a move or something, that you can actually create space for everybody to talk about what scares them about this thing. And if we're truly doing something that's innovative, new, challenging, and big, we should be scared a little bit because we're going into the unknown. So we have to have space for the people to talk about it. We also need the space for people to say, I don't know, and then get the help, support, training, whatever they need so that they can achieve the goal. And what happens in organizations, and I'm sure you've seen it, and I've seen it on tons of teams, when people can't speak their truth, when someone isn't safe enough to say, I need help, they fake it, and then we find out later when the team doesn't meet its goal, right? When we don't achieve our numbers, when the team is having conflict or dissonance and mistrust in the relationships. Why? Because there's people on the team that don't want to throw that person under the bus, and that person knows they can't do what they committed to. Like, all of this is sitting on every team all the time. And like I said, I mentioned families because sometimes I work with families. I do values work with executives, and sometimes they bring it into their family. And what I see is the same dynamics there. The issues might be a little different, but the same tension exists. And that's why I want to present to you that a key part of this is that the leader has to go first, right? You can't ask your team or your spouse and teenagers, by the way, to do something if you don't demonstrate it. I want to say that again. You can't ask or expect people to do something if you aren't doing it yourself. So it is important that you are able to say, I'm sorry, that you are able to say, I did that wrong. I hired the wrong person. Not popular, not easy to admit you are wrong and to be weak. But I promise you, if you are a leader or a parent, and you can be real with people and admit your flaws, admit what you're insecure about, have moments in time where you talk about your fear. If you have failure in your past, I also want to tell you that in most of the programs where we are working with and training high potential leaders, I always ask the executives to tell the stories that they don't really want people to know. Like, early in my career, I was fired. That kind of vulnerability opens up the room. It invites every person to participate 100%, to not hold back, to not sit in the shadows, to not hold back when they know something's wrong in the business or in your family, by the way, right? We need this openness. And I want to add to it that I think that this issue is becoming more and more critical. Like, there was a time where people would say to me, vulnerability-based trust. And on some teams, I would say, I don't know if they can handle it, or maybe that's a luxury item here. Now it's critical. I think it's just essential. It's baseline. We need it everywhere. And one of the reasons is because it seems, I don't know why, but time seems to be moving way faster than it ever has before. Information is flowing faster. And I know you know in your own business, regardless of what it is, the amount of information and data that people need to process on a regular basis is providing more and more either confrontations or opportunities or both for people to disagree. And if your team doesn't know how to disagree without damage, you got a problem. It will slow you down. You will not be able to count on your team to make good decisions, which means you'll be micromanaging, or you'll just try to make all the decisions on your own, which also is not a good strategy, right? So the core of this, so if you are out there, by the way, and you're going to do a team development session, or you're already thinking about what book should I give my team? It's January 2024. Maybe you want to kick off this calendar year differently. I would say anything by Pat Lencioni has this built into it, vulnerability-based trust. Brene Brown also has written a number of books. You could start with Daring Greatly. There's her leadership book, Leading Greatly. I can't remember the name, sorry. Look, they're all about vulnerability. Also, it is not touchy-feely. It is not pie in the sky. This is super practical recommendations Both of those books and authors, all those books and both of those authors have really great exercises and easy to use. You don't need to pay a facilitator or an outside person to do this for you. You can, of course, if you want to take it to the next level, there are assessments out there that support it. I would say if you haven't done it before, this is the year for you to start modeling this, to learn more about it, to maybe get out of your own comfort zone and practice being more vulnerable as a foundation for yourself in all of your relationships. The last thing I just want to say is I also believe vulnerability-based trust helps us help people who are struggling. And we all know it's all over the media. And I know human resources in many organizations are talking about this over and over again, being concerned about people's mental health, being concerned about people who are working remotely and maybe are isolated more often since the pandemic in new work environments that are hybrid. So there is nothing better to crack open and form relationships with people than you being vulnerable, telling stories. That's an easy way to do this, by the way. And I want you to pay attention to when you tell stories. So when you're doing one-on-ones with people and you're getting to know them, you're asking them to tell you more about their life, you're sharing more about yours. And I really hope you're doing this. If you're not, you're missing an opportunity to strengthen your team and strengthen the power of the relationships that are driving the getting stuff done and the decisions. But when you tell stories, being vulnerable means you don't just tell the good part of the story. You don't just tell the funny part of the story. You balance that out by sharing other emotions, like I was scared to death of that, or the first time I got a job in the company, I didn't really like the culture, but I grew into it. And here's what it is, right? Balancing your stories out when you're with people and then probing with people for more vulnerability without saying those words. So I'm not saying get on the phone or the Zoom with someone and say, hey, let's be vulnerable. Don't do that. That would be awkward. No, invite people to tell real stories. I know many organizations include in their interview process, like tell me a time that you failed. The problem with interview processes is people practice those and oftentimes don't tell the real messy parts of those stories. So if you're a leader, I dare you to make it okay for people to tell the messy parts. Make it a critical part of the way you all talk to each other to talk about the whole story. How did you recover? If you were scared, what did you do so that you weren't scared anymore? If you came to work at this company and you weren't sure that you liked it, and like me, you thought, I don't know if this culture is going to be a fit for me, but you stayed. Why did you do that? Right? Those kind of storytelling moments have depth and it has breadth. It gets you human connection. It allows everyone, like I said, to be vulnerable without being awkward or too staged. It makes it natural. And the more natural vulnerability that you can have in your relationships at home and at work creates a glue, a trust, right? That is really, really hard to break. And then when the bad times come, where it will, right? There's going to be problems. There are going to be times that your team can't do the initiative on time, or that your budget gets cut, or worse, maybe your company goes through layoffs, etc., and people aren't feeling great. Well, it's that glue. It's vulnerability-based trust that are going to get you through that and help those relationships stick together and then recover and be more resilient when it's time to do the next wave of hard things. So, thank you for being with me. I hope this is helpful for you. If you have any suggestions or topics that you think would be appropriate for deep work fast, let me know, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Go off.